Ladybird, the free, open source, and completely from scratch web browser, which started as part of the Serenity OS project, has been branched out, made into its own nonprofit organization, and has been seeded with a $1 million grant from the founder of GitHub. Holy smokes, this is great news. This is pure awesome news. I just published an article on this over at the Lunduke Journal. I'm going to read part of it to you now because this is fantastic. It is so rare that the Lunduke Journal gets to break interesting and fun and truly optimistic and wonderful news without any sort of yuckiness. There's no politics here. There's no organizations and foundations doing weird stuff here. It's just pure optimism for the future. This is really fantastic. I'm going to read part of it to you now. I've got a whole lot more I need to say on this. The original founder of GitHub, Chris Wanstrath, has partnered up with the founder of Serenity OS and the Ladybird Web Browser, Andreas Kling, to create the Ladybird Browser Initiative, a USA-based nonprofit, I believe they're a 501c3, dedicated exclusively to building a brand new web browser from scratch. And while many have claimed for many years that developing a brand new web browser, especially a web browser engine from scratch, is an impossible goal, a ridiculous goal, a foolhardy goal, the founders of the Ladybird Browser Initiative believe they can do it. What's more, they are confident it can be done without taking any funding from corporate deals or advertising revenue. This is a big deal. More on this in just a moment. So their goal is to have a fully functional alpha version of the Ladybird browser ready for common usage sometime in 2026. Now, that's over a year away. Depending on when in 2026 that launches, that could be 2 years away. So they've got a lot of time between now and then. But let's talk a little bit about the funding, because this is, in my opinion, put all the tech stuff aside. Just for a moment, we're going to come back to the tech part of it, the actual browser engine part here. But the funding is an absolutely critical piece of this equation because how they're approaching this is fantastic. So roughly 1 year ago, the Ladybird browser received their first major sponsorship in the form of $100,000 from Shopify. And now, there was a couple of smaller ones that came after that as well. And now, with the creation of this 501c3 nonprofit, with a $1 million pledge from the GitHub founder, Ladybird is preparing to become the only major web browser which does not treat the user like the product being sold in any way. I want to quote you guys on this because this is a really big deal. Today, this is from Chris Wanstrath, the founder of GitHub. Today, every major browser engine is open source, which is wonderful. But there is still one issue. They are all funded by Google's advertising empire. The bold here is mine. Chrome, Edge, Brave, Arc, and Opera all use Google's Chromium. Apple receives billions to make Google the default search engine in Safari, and Firefox has a similar deal where they receive hundreds of millions each year. The world needs a browser that puts people first, contributes to open standards, using a brand new engine, and is free from advertising's influence. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things here, because what they're talking about is 100% true. While there are some fantastic browsers out there, browsers that I am personally a fan of. One good example is Brave. Brave is an excellent browser that is not part of Mozilla. They're not part of Google or Microsoft, right? They do their own thing. However, they do use that same engine that Google Chromium uses, right? And all of it comes through that Google advertising empire. Those Google ad dollars is what makes all of that happen. We really do need something that is truly independent. And many people point to Firefox and say, that's our independent browser engine. But it's really, really not. Firefox derives almost all of its revenue entirely from Google ad dollars. Google funds Firefox just like Google funds Chrome. It's the same. We need something that's fundamentally different outside of that ecosystem, outside of the influence of Google. We need that. Now, the fact that every major browser engine is funded by advertising, specifically Google, is indeed a concern, which makes the idea of a web browser free from that influence incredibly interesting. So how exactly is Ladybird going to pull this off? Here's her quote. Unlike traditional business models that rely on monetizing the user, Ladybird is funded entirely by sponsorships and donations from companies and individuals who care about the open web. Ooh, nice. Our nonprofit will not pursue corporate deals or revenue outside of unrestricted donations. The software and its source code will be available for free forever. End quote. Now, while it's easy to dismiss the notion of, quote, funding a web browser via donations, end quote, as an unachievable and highly whimsical goal, Ladybird has already had some significant success in that area, not least of which is the $1 million from the GitHub Founder, resulting in Ladybird already having 4 full-paid, full-time developers with 3 more programmers, according to the organization, starting soon. And this is not, they're not staffing up, an HR department and a marketing person and a business development relations guy and a lady to spearhead a DEI program. No. Programmers. Programmers. So maybe this approach is not as unachievable and whimsical as it first seems. So let's talk about the no corporate control part, right? Let's really dive into this. Here's a statement. Our nonprofit will not pursue corporate deals or revenue outside of unrestricted donations. That is an amazing quote. So what does that mean in practice? It means that Ladybird will not be doing corporate deals for default search engines or marketing campaigns for other companies, which we see the likes of Mozilla doing regularly. This means that if they can stick to their guns, and that's an if, right? I mean, this is a brand new nonprofit. The people involved give us a whole lot of confidence, but just the same, they still have to stick to their guns. But if they can, Ladybird stands a real chance of being a truly independent web browser, one which no company can control. In fact, the Ladybird Browser Initiative even has a policy. This is awesome. A stated policy specifically not allowing corporate donors to buy board seats. Rad. Quote, all sponsorships are in the form of unrestricted donations. Board seats and other forms of influence are not for sale. Awesome. Awesome. That's awesome. Now, I can't express to you how excited I am to see this happen. This is the right way. And just to put a fine point on it, exactly how big of a deal this is, let's look over here at the Linux Foundation briefly. Right? Let's look at another foundation, right? Because there's a lot of different types of nonprofits and tech trade foundations and all sorts of different legal entities for foundations. But let's look at another foundation that's supposed to be focused on an open source project, and that being the Linux Foundation. Well, the Linux Foundation specifically sells their board seats. So the vast majority of the seats, their voting board seats, are purchased by major companies. Oracle and Microsoft and many others, right? They get in there, VMware. They get in there and they decide how to drive the entire foundation, the foundation which controls the development of the Linux kernel, right? Well, we've seen what that results in. Putting aside all of the strange political spending, the fact that they spend 6 times the money on AI that they do on Linux, they only spend 2% of what comes in on Linux. Over 70% of the companies that sit on their board of directors of a project that is licensed under the GPL license, 70% plus of those companies routinely violate the GPL license themselves, right? So it's what you have is an obvious conflict of interest, and managing and steering a foundation into the ground. And it is from my point of view at least, they make a ton of money, so it's not like they're going out of business tomorrow. So they're not steering it into the ground in that way, but steering it ashore in terms of not actually accomplishing the thing that they're supposed to be accomplishing, right? So to see a foundation, a nonprofit, come along and say, you know what? We're just going to say flat out, we're going to make a statement right in day one. Day one, no board seats are for sale. No big tech influence. We're just going to make a web browser and we don't care what you all think about it. Love that. Love it so very much. I first heard just a little inside baseball on this. I first heard about the Ladybird Browser initiative. I'm excited right now. I can't speak. I'm so excited. Months ago, right? This has been in the works for quite some time. And when I first heard about it, besides being sworn to secrecy, which was very hard to keep my mouth shut, I was asked, how important are certain things, and if we've got policies around board members and whatnot, and how all that works, what's important so that the Ladybird Browser nonprofit avoids so many of the pitfalls that Mozilla and the Linux Foundation and so many other organizations run into. And this is one of the things I pointed out, and to see them embrace it, to see Ladybird embrace this is a massive deal. I couldn't be more proud of these guys. Way to go. Way to friggin' go. I'm impressed, and stick to it because this is awesome. Another thing that I think is really important here is that the Ladybird browser is singularly focused, as they put it. They focus on one thing, the web browser. That means that aside from them not pursuing, companies investing in a bunch of money in them and they get a board seat in return, they're not going to do that. They're also not going to do advertising for revenue, right? They're not going to do default search engine placement for revenue. They're not going to spin up a VPN company. They're not going to spin up a password wallet bookmark company. They're not going to do any of these things, right? They're going to make a web browser, and that's it. That's it, and that's all. They're going to focus. It's very Unixy, right? It's just do one thing and do it well. Right? One thing and do it well. Make a great web browser and web browser engine, and that's it. No monetization, no default search engine deals, no crypto tokens, no or other forms of user monetization ever. I gotta respect that. I gotta respect that. I do. I think it's interesting in reading through the announcement from Ladybird. They make a very clear point of they call out pretty much every major web browser in their own little ways with their own little, here's how we're differentiating, here's our little dig at them. And, but they do it in a fairly nice way. I appreciate how they approach it. I almost made several different comments just there. I'm going to put them off to the side. All right. So here's where the current status is, right? As of right now, if you go to ladybird.org, there's no download. Right? You can't go and get a build. However, you can get the source code and build it yourself with build instructions. I've recently done it for Mac OS. It works. I've recently done it for Linux. It works. I used to use Ladybird occasionally back on Serenity OS when I was testing that out. It works. Yeah, the code is available. It does build, and you can use it. As they say, quote, we can already do some of our daily browsing with Ladybird. That's a huge deal. Like managing GitHub issues and pull requests and commenting on hacker news. The browser is improving every day as our community of contributors are actively fixing bugs and adding features. Now, the fact that you can manage GitHub issues and pull requests means that you can interact with fairly complex websites. Now, I've done a fair bit of testing on it somewhat recently. And from my experience, some websites work perfectly, including some complex websites with fairly complex layout and some interactive JavaScript elements and all sorts of stuff. Other websites don't work at all. They're just broken. A lot of websites mostly work. Now, that means that can you use Ladybird as your day-to-day browser right now? And the answer is no. No, you can't. Can you do some web browsing with Ladybird right now and it work really well? Yes, you can. You will have to have another browser side by side, right? Like if you're like, man, I want to use Ladybird for as much as I can, you're still going to need to have something like Brave or something else installed side by side so you can use the vast majority of the web. You just have to toggle back and forth between the browsers. Now, considering the amount of progress that the Ladybird team has made over the last just year alone, because man, the progress they've made in the last year is amazing. It is nothing short of spectacular. I am fairly confident that their estimate that they can have in 2026 an alpha release that generally is a good web browser. You know, maybe it's got some rough edges, maybe there's some issues that need to be ironed out, maybe there's some additional JavaScript support needed, something like that. I could see that. That seems viable to me. That seems entirely reasonable. It's going to be a ton of work for the team. There's a million things that could go wrong between now and then for sure, because we're talking about a very complex software project. But considering what they have done, yeah, it actually does seem viable. And to be clear about this, evaluating the viability of shipping software before I became a journalist is kind of what I did. Excuse me. I was a programmer for many years, and then I was a dev lead, a dev manager, a VP of engineering for several companies. And my specialty was coming into a company, noticing that and figuring out why we weren't shipping, and figure out a way to ship and figure out a reasonable ship schedule. That's what I did. I was like the A team of come in and get a software package release out the door when it was already really late and we needed to figure out how to make it ship. Like that was my thing, right? And so when I look at the current state of the code, the progress that they've made thus far, and having a general understanding of the massive amount of work they've got ahead of them, there's no way, like later this year, no. Will they make massive progress between now and the end of 2024? Oh yeah. Just looking at the progress over the last 6 months, extrapolate that over the next 6 months, and Ladybird will continue most likely to be an increasingly more usable piece of web browsing awesomeness. But by 2026, yeah, this might be absolutely day-to-day drivable with maybe a few caveats. That's a pretty big friggin' deal. So let's talk about the buzzwords a little bit, because if they can hold to their gun, and truly not be chasing buzzwords, Ladybird browser will stand alone in that regard. I mean, look at the amount of buzzwords that Mozilla is chasing. Let's see, do I have this up here? Yeah. So Mozilla, the makers of Firefox, have announced repeatedly that Firefox really isn't their priority. Artificial intelligence is their priority, right? This is part of their 5 and 25-year plan. Their 5-year plan didn't even include a mention of Firefox outside of, they said something like, we need AI products that are like Firefox, as in successful. Excuse me. I'm all worked up and excited. And so when you've got, whether they're companies or foundations or whatnot, everyone's saying, okay, well, there's a new buzzword. Oh, we're going to throw some AI into it. And oh, we're going to do this. And oh, we're going to do that. We're going to add these things that have nothing to do with web browsing. It starts to get a little bit annoying as a user. And also, it makes it so that these companies and these foundations are increasingly not focusing on the browser engine, the web browsing experience. Increasingly, they're focusing on the value-added functionality that they can add on top of all of that. And Ladybird, it looks like, is just going to forego all of that. So I sent a question. I sent a question over to Andreas Kling, the founder of Ladybird and the co-founder of the Ladybird Browser initiative. And that question is this. Now that the Ladybird Web Browser has an official nonprofit with multiple full-time developers working on it, you're clearly moving towards direct competition with the likes of Google and Mozilla. The eye of Sauron is upon you. How does that feel? And here is his response in full. Feels great. I'm sure Frodo felt the same way. The eye of Sauron is upon you, Frodo. How does that feel? It feels great. The web is one of humanity's greatest inventions, he goes on to say, and it deserves diverse competing implementations to truly thrive. The industry has been heading in a troubling direction for years, with companies like Microsoft and Opera abandoning their own browser engine in favor of Chromium. By the way, I just want to point this out because it makes me smile so gosh darn much. He says it deserves, right, so we're talking about the web, it deserves diverse competing implementations to truly thrive. It is so gosh darn refreshing to see someone use the word diverse and actually talk about a diverse thing, like real intellectual implementations of engineering and software, multiple different types of implementations, meaning diverse, and not talking about some DEI related thing, not talking about some political point scoring thing, no, but being real engineering about it and using diverse the right way. Thank you. So the industry has been heading in a troubling direction for years, with companies like Microsoft and abandoning their own browser engines in favor of Chromium. That is a problem. That really is a problem. Now, we obviously don't have the resources of companies like Google, Apple, and Mozilla, so things will take some time. However, I'm extremely optimistic about the road ahead. We have a fantastic community of developers working on Ladybird, and we're making solid, consistent progress. One thing we have going for us, unlike the major players, we're completely focused on one thing only, the web browser. We won't be chasing buzzwords or looking for alternative revenue streams. Our goal is to build a good browser and give it away for free while soliciting nothing but unrestricted donations from anyone who likes what we're doing. Okay, all right, bullet point time. No chasing buzzwords. Okay, I like that. No alternative revenue streams, no AI, no VPN companies, no browser default tie-ins, nothing like that, right? Beautiful, love it. A total focus on the web browser, right? Not getting distracted by implementing 3,000 different pieces of functionality that have nothing to do with web browsing into the browser and then spitting up some AI companies. No, just browser. Love it. A brand new from scratch browser engine. Well, that's just great. That's just great. I mean, web browsers are big. Browser technology has evolved so much over the years. I mean, just look at both the Chromium-based stuff and the Firefox-based stuff. So much has happened since those engines were created that creating something new from scratch at this point might make a fair bit of sense. Reiterating, dialing in further, no advertising or big tech influence. Where have you heard that before? I love it. A web browser whose core ethos is in line with that of the Lunduke Journal. Oh my goodness, I couldn't be more happy about that. And this just makes me smile. We've got a ragtag fleet of rebels going toe-to-toe with the big tech web browser makers. Oh my gosh. That's a story right there. That is a story, and that is awesome. Oh my gosh. So, okay, yeah. We know. It's a ways off. We've got possibly 2 years before we're gonna have daily or regular binary builds of Ladybird we can download and everyone use, and it's an official alpha and blah blah blah. I know that. I need to temper my expectations because we're a ways off. If I get too excited right now, my head's going to explode and then I'm just going to be sad. But this is really good news. This is really, really legitimately good news for the future of web. And I want to daydream for a moment here. Because what we're really talking about is not just the creation of Ladybird, but the creation of a new browser engine. So I've made no attempt to hide that I'm a fan of Brave. That's my current go-to web browsers. I like Brave. Why do I like Brave? Because when I use a piece of software, I like to know a few things. One, I like to know that the people making it don't hate me personally. That's nice. And I don't just mean me personally by name, though that's nice too, because the folks at Mozilla sure don't like Lunduke. There's an official policy related to that over there. But so many of the browser makers, and Mozilla is a big one, they get so political where they specifically target people with politics that they don't like and say things like, we want to do more than deplatform those people. We want to go after those people. We want to make sure those people are censored on the internet. And that's Mozilla's stances, right? That's the maker of Firefox's stance. And so if you are among the people that they don't like, it's really hard to use that piece of software and not have it feel yucky, right? At the very, very least, it feels yucky. And so when a organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a company, an individual, whatever, comes along and says, you know what, regardless of what my politics are or your politics are, what I'm going to do now is make a great piece of software and stay out of the political stuff entirely. That is darned refreshing. Darned refreshing. It makes me smile because, truth be told, I do not know the personal politics of the founder of GitHub, and I do not care. What I see here is people wanting to make a great web browser for the world to use. And it has nothing to do with politics. I couldn't find a scrap of political even hinting on their website or among their announcements. The most political things I could find is the fact that they wanted it to be open source. And if you consider that to be a political statement, we'll take it as one, but that's about it. There was no hinting at, we're going to do this with the human relations department, and we're going to do this with these groups of people, and we're going to implement this sort of censorship. They didn't talk about censorship. They didn't talk about deplatforming of people like what Mozilla talks about regularly. None of that stuff. They just were like, hey, let's build a great web browser. Okay, here's money to hire programmers. Okay, well, we'll need to hire HR people and some policy people and a diversity. No. They're hiring programmers. Why? Because it's a programming project. And that's it. I love it. I just absolutely love it. I absolutely am enamored with it. And what I would love to see, if I'm really having my druthers, if I'm daydreaming about what a beautiful future looks like, I would love to see folks like Vivaldi and Brave and Opera and all of the third-party ragtag browsers. Though Brave is significantly less ragtag lately. They're getting a huge user base. But I would love to see them investing in Ladybird and have an eye towards eventually being able to use Ladybird as the core browser engine in their future browsers. Because then, if Brave wants to have multiple pieces of functionality, including their Brave search and their artificial intelligence and their crypto, they can. If Vivaldi wants to go the same route, if Opera wants to go the same route, they all have their options to monetize their browsers how they see fit, to provide more complex pieces of functionality beyond just simple load a web page as much as they want, right? And differentiate themselves however they want, just like they do currently while using the same Chromium engine. But then they're using something that's not tied to Google, right? They're not at the whims of Google anymore. They could then have the option of saying, okay, there are other browser engines we could not just utilize, but we could utilize and it would deshackle us from Google. I like that. I like that as an option, even if Brave and Vivaldi and Opera and everyone else don't actually go that route. I like that as an option. Having that option is fantastic. And it's not just great from the end user getting a choice about different engines we could use. It's great because it forces all of the browser engines to more strictly adhere to the same web standards and specs. right? Because if the W3C and everyone else comes up with a set of specifications for here's how HTML and CSS and JavaScript and the object model and everything else works, but there's only one engine made by one company, they can just kind of do whatever they want. And every web designer and web developer has to contort themselves into knots, adhering to whatever quirks and idiosyncrasies and bugs are in that browser engine. But if there are multiple, and I mean not just two, but several viable, functional, quality web engines, including one that's not funded by Google, because Firefox is funded by Google. Firefox might as well be Google for all intents and purposes. But if we have one that's not, and it gains any sort of traction, even tiny traction, even like shooting for the moon 1%, right? Shooting for the moon several years from now, it's at 1% browser market share, and that's it, which is totally reasonable. I mean, Google Chrome went from not to like 70% market share in the blink of an eye. It's totally viable. Software things switch on a whim, just randomly. So 1% forces web developers and the other makers, the developers behind the other engines, to more accurately conform to web standards, which then in turn makes it more viable, more increasingly viable to make additional engines in the future. I mean, this is just a positive thing no matter which way you look at it. And I know, I'm all excited, and there's a million things that can go wrong, and there's a ton of work to do, and there's a lot of variables at play. But this is a positive, optimistic moment. And if you want to support the work of the Ladybird browser, go to ladybird.org. I will be, because it's worth it. You know, I don't have a ton of buckazoids sitting in my wallet, but I'm going to toss a few over. Because it's worth it, right? It's worth it to see this sort of thing happening. You love to see it. And their approach to how they're handling finances. I know that Mozilla and Google and everyone else isn't going to spontaneously adopt the Ladybird approach here, where they're not going to sell board seats and they're never going to do advertising revenue, and they're not going to spin up VPN companies and whatnot. I get that. But maybe if there's enough positive press about how great it is, let's say, for example, that the Ladybird browser is not selling board seats, right? No contributing company can spontaneously get a seat on their board of directors just because they gave them some money. If enough positive press happens because of that, and enough light gets shown on Mozilla, on the Mozilla Foundation and the Linux Foundation and so many other nonprofits that do exactly that sell board member seats for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. It's crazy. The Lunduke Journal is one of the only outlets that reports on this. But if that reporting can spread and all the other tech news outlets start reporting on this, like, you know what? This thing Ladybird's doing, where they're not selling their board seats, that's pretty great. What if other outlets did that too? What if Linux Foundation stopped doing that? I mean, shoot, the Linux Foundation used to have community board member elections where they had 2 seats on their board of directors that the community could vote for. They got rid of those. They got rid of those in favor of adding more seats on the board that companies could then buy for several $100,000 a year. That's true. It's crazy. What if those foundations stopped doing that, or pledged to phase it out or something, because of this, providing that impetus, showing people how it could be done? Now, I'm not asking the Linux Foundation or any of these other foundations to go to a purely donation model where there's no other revenue streams. I know they've got their $250 million organizations. They don't want to change that. But maybe they could make a few little tweaks to make it just a little bit better. And maybe the Ladybird Browser Initiative will show them the way. I'm just saying, there's a lot to be optimistic for here. Thank you, everyone. that subscribes to the Lunduke Journal and makes all of this possible, that all of this reporting possible. I couldn't run the Lunduke Journal without all of you. Go to lunduke.com. There is, over on the left side of the page, you'll find something called Lunduke Journal Link Central. And on there, you'll find my contact information, details on how to leak files and become a whistleblower, whatever organization you work for, RSS podcast feeds, where to follow me on Twitter, how to get all of the DRM-free PDF ebooks and whatnot that I produce over the years. There's like a dozen of them in there. And then lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of articles. In fact, everything on that page is just a tip of the iceberg of what's available, because once you become a subscriber to the Lunduke Journal, you get full access to the content archive, which means every video, every article, every big show idea, every Linux Sucks show, everything is all in there. It's all ad-free, it's all troll-free, it's all free from big tech, and it's all thanks to all the subscribers like you. I couldn't do it without you. So go to lunduke.com. All the links are right there on the left-hand side of the page. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, man, it's a happy news day. Happy news day. I do declare end broadcast.